Welcome to Rampart AI's latest Fast Chat. I'm Daphne Singer, CMO of Rampart AI. Joining me to delve into the latest developments surrounding the Invante breach and to explore the evolving landscape of cybersecurity is Hector Monsegur, a distinguished cybersecurity expert, thought leader, and security researcher. Joining as well is Lee Krause, CEO of Rampart AI, which is an application security tool for business continuity. So if you're part of the cybersecurity world, you know about the Invante breach. Lee, do you want to give a little background on the breach and then we'll just jump right in?
Sure. So I think it's a little bit more than just the Avante breach. I think there are a lot of things happening in the community last week associated with the FBI disclosing that nation states hacking our infrastructure and probably have positions, um, in, I guess, exploits in advance. And then you see what happens with the Avante breach, and you see that it was breached on the 10th. And then they came up with new incarnations, and the final incarnation was just a totally new exploit itself. And I think that the fact that they basically asked it to be disconnected from the networks on Friday is just tells you something really was up. And from my position, it's people were just taking advantage of this and dumping exploits onto networks to gain a foothold. And I think that what you're seeing is that the concept that our networks are secure and that we can treat them that way is changing. And I think that's really the key aspect of what happened last week. I think the bubble burst that we can just assume everything's good, have a VPN or a firewall, and you're always going to be good. And I think that's what's changed.
Perfect. So let's talk about what all this means to the organization. So if your system had been impacted by this vulnerability or any of the ones you just went over, what is the outcome and what are the next steps?
So I guess I can start, and Hector, you can really bring it home. How's that?
That sounds great.
So I think what it really means for an organization is they have to fight on two fronts. They have to fight the front, which says, how do I stop the leak, the exploits from happening? And two, which I think is the much harder problem, is how do I get to a point that I trust my environment's clean, that exploits haven't been downloaded, there's information there that hasn't been exploited. How do I figure out what my current state is? And how do I deal with that new environment of if people went laterally on me, how do we figure out how to get them out? And how do we make it so that we can continue to monitor our networks to ensure that they're secure?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree there, right? So there is a lot of complications to the current state of cybersecurity and the organizations that are having to deal with. A lot of the vulnerabilities are being exploited. Um, there's also fatigue, Daphne and team here. There's fatigue from organizations are constantly now, um, due to all these new rules with the SEC here in the United States. We've seen charges against a CISO of a prominent company. We've seen a lot of emphasis on cybersecurity policies, insurance policies. Then, of course, all the frameworks to require all sorts of regulations and have all sorts of requirements. And now, with an organization investing so much into all of these different tools and capabilities and policies and resources and training, now they also have to deal with the fact that, yeah, there are 0 days. There are going to be 0 days in the products that they're purchasing to help them with their initial problems, you know? And when you have a product that is let's say like a VPN, for example, which goes back to Avanti and Pulse VPN here, um, it becomes even more difficult because you're going to have the executives of the world, the elite in this case, having to travel, having to do business. That's their modus operandi. That's what they have to do. But how is he going to be able to trust that the network is not compromised with all these 0 days and still have to deal with, okay, well, we need a VPN for me to access a corporate network, right? So there's a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of stress over this. This is why like InfoSec Twitter and the news went crazy rampant once we start to see that, aside from like the Pulse VPN vulnerabilities came out, mid early to mid late last year, then you had the Avanti vulnerabilities one after another, back and forth, right? Whether they are vulnerability or patch regressions or iterations, we're also seeing completely new vulnerabilities coming out of this, and it's tough. It's kind of a cat and mouse game for a lot of these organizations having to deal with this problem.
So Hector, on that, have we reached the point where everyone talks about emerging threats, the use of AI to basically make it so that we can't keep up? Are we starting to see that in the field where the whole concept of being rule-based or signature-based, that we need to find a different way to secure our networks, that the old model isn't working? I mean, I think we're almost at the point that we've reached the point of no return on that.
I agree. I mean, look, even and Lee, you've been around as long as I have here. Uh, Even signature-based systems were obsoleted in the early 2000s, right? When you could deploy a snort or deploy some sort of mechanism to listen to traffic and then detect based off of signatures. What did the attackers do, Lee? They started to create polymorphic algorithms or polymorphic payloads to slightly modify their own signature to kind of circumvent the signatures that were being deployed or distributed or disseminated by the security industry. Um, what you're eventually going to see is researchers or exploit developers, rather, those that are monetizing these 0 days, um, absolutely leveraging AI for those iterated vulnerabilities. Imagine if you identify a massive corporate product that has large deployments, right? You identify a set of vulnerabilities in that product, whether it's through fuzzing, reverse engineering, what have you, um, and then based off of maybe machine learning, you can start to identify versions of vulnerabilities that would be patched, right, in a one-off scenario, but you could easily and quickly develop a new exploit for it post-patch, and we're probably going to see a lot more of that.
What lasting impacts, if any, should companies brace themselves for if an adversary got inside their network?
My take, I go back to what you said when the first time we met, Hector. What's the
Mhm.
easiest way to break into a system is have it call out to you. And I think
Right.
that what you're seeing today is at the application level that we're taking that mantra and basically saying if we can take advantage of these types of breaches, get inside of the application, and then have the application trigger at our choosing. I mean, to me, that's what I see happening. It's your words, but that's what I see.
Yeah, we've had a lot of great conversations, and we probably bore the audience with the kind of stuff we've discussed. But the reality is that and definitely this goes directly to your question, right? Um, if I were on the other side, so I'm on the offensive side in cyber risk, or the red team side. If I were on the blue side, I would probably try to build a policy around assuming that we're breached or assuming that we're about to be breached. Um, you know, I know a lot of folks like to, play around with the term zero trust or say, let's ignore zero trust and go to least trust, or let's break it into individual components. Let's talk about layered security. All of that is great, right? You want to make it expensive for the bad guy once they get into your network, and yes, eventually they will get into your network, unfortunately. Um, Now, once they get into that network, assuming that you don't have a cool tool like Rampart to help you mitigate that stuff, um, they get into the network. You want to make it expensive for them to move laterally. That's one. You want to be able to detect them relatively soon, right? It's going to be very expensive for them, especially when you know that most of your attackers are likely going to be ransomware groups or initial access brokers. They just want to get in and try to monetize that breach, right? Now, if the conversation is, well, what if it's a nation state actor trying to get into your network? That's a different conversation because their methodology is different, right? When you have a ransomware IAB trying to get into your network, as soon as they're in, they're moving laterally, they're scanning, they're doing Kerberos attacks, relay attacks, they're making noise. Okay. With a nation state attack, is a bit different. They'll go inside. We saw the report, Lee. It came out a couple days ago. The FBI and CISA released a report on a Chinese actor group compromising elements of the governments, and they would log into a network, extract credentials, and log off for 4 or 5 months. Right? How do you deal with that? So we have to be clever about this. We kind of need to think of ways to deal with that. And I personally believe, and this is why, I linked up with you guys early on. I'm very big on looking for anomalies. I'm very big on behavior profiling. Big fan of that stuff because I think that's a better route than staring at your screen, looking at logs all day, hoping you find a obvious Kerberos attack. Right? That's not realistic.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the point that saying how we have to make it harder for them to be successful, make them jump through a lot of hoops so they show that they're there. You know what I mean? Just as much as anything, we just need to make it hard. Stop the easy path. So you're in, now you're going to have to get out, and it's not going to be easy. I also think that um, from an organization, you have to really understand what's your crown jewel and how to protect it. And it's your applications that make you money. It's your data that makes you money. How do you protect it? How do you stay on top of it? And I think those are the things that people are going to start to rethink because before it was I had a VPN, so no one else was going to get in. I had a firewall. We whitelist or blacklist. And so now I think they're going to have to really think if you're at the application level, then how much of that matters and how much of it doesn't matter and how much power do they have? Because it's really the table turns once you're inside.
So let's talk for a minute about application vendors. How can we effectively manage security standards when companies are reliant on vendors to uphold best practices?
Lee, if you don't mind, I'll jump into this. But this is a tough one, right? Because let's put together a premise. You are an organization, you have your CIO. The CIO has developed policies. They've worked with all sorts of people to build those policies. The CISO is supposed to enforce many of those policies. The IT director is supposed to enforce the IT policies. So you have all this work that's being done. You have all these different SOC and SIM and logging, and you have all these really cool tools. But still, at the end of the day, okay, um, you still have to reach out to a vendor for the product, the solution that it is that you need to conduct business within your industry. So if you're a credit union, for example, right, in the credit union space, they have very specific products dedicated to credit union things, right? Banking software and all sorts of accounting software that's very specific to the credit union space. Now, if those products are vulnerable to a series of 0 days, and there are attackers focusing on the credit union space, then they are going to compromise a large number of credit unions here in the United States or in other places around the world, right? How do you deal with that? It's hard. I've seen companies, that work with a vendor ask for attestation letters, evidence or proof of pen testing or other services. They're looking for all sorts of compliance. Hey, are you guys SOC 2? Hey, are you CMMC, right? Are you compliant to these different frameworks? And even with all of that, definitely, right? That vendor could still be compromised. The vendor could still have an insider threat. They could be attacked. They could be a scam, right? It could be snake oil. There's so many different ways that that's going to hurt you. Unfortunately, okay. Unfortunately, that's the situation a lot of organizations are in. It's cheaper to go that route than to build your own solution, and in most cases, it doesn't make sense business-wise to build your own solution. Now, with all of that being said, now we have the premise in mind. How does an organization deal with the fact that maybe their vendor is not following the standards or is not where they need to be, right? There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of hope that the third party vendor is where they need to be. This is why we've had conversations here in the United States where Lee and Daphne, I'm not sure you guys seen this, but it wasn't CISA, but it was somebody in the government that was trying to propose a bill that would add kind of like some sort of a branding or sticker, very similar to like the energy safe stickers you see on appliances, on routers and products that are being imported into the United States. And the big debate on that conversation was, well, is that sticker really going to correlate with the security standards that vendors probably going to, or say they're going to follow? And the answer is probably not, right? We've seen energy safe devices that are not energy safe. Okay. So I guess my answer to your question, Daphne, is it's a big trust problem. It's a big accountability problem as well. And for the customers, they probably always going to have to assume a breach, including through the third-party vendors.
Mm-hmm.
That's
No,
my take.
I think you could take it a little bit further too. I think that um, not only is it that you're taking trust, but can you get to the point where they prove it to you? Can you give me metrics? Can you show me the behavior of my system? Can you prove it to me day in and day out? It's not blind trust. Show me along the way. I think it also goes to cloud vendors. Cloud vendors are another. We count on them to keep everything safe. But really, what they're worried about is their systems up and running, and not really worried about your applications that are running in their space. That's not their focus. Their focus is on uptime of their system. And I think that you're depending on them for the foundation of all your applications are running, your containers, your Kubernetes, things that are involved in that. All of them have potential as well. So I think at every layer, you need to be able to have a way for them to prove to you that your systems are working as expected, whether they're developed in-house by you, whether they're open source, or whether they're a SaaS service. They're going to have to provide to you some quality of service metric, or that shows that my application is doing, these are the number of transactions we did, these are the number of transactions that are different than usual for my customer base. And I think you're going to start to see people demanding that. And I think one of the things that's going to force it is from cyber insurance. So the example that you gave, which is the credit union, who's really on the hook? Is it the SaaS provider of the credit union service, or is it the credit union? It starts to get interesting there.
That's right.
Perfect. So let's do a little bonus here. So is there anything that either of you on this topic want to talk about that we didn't already talk about?
I think, at least from my end, it's people like Hector that are really doing research in the area that are making it better for others. And I think that what's really important is staying up to date on what's happening out there, trying to move more towards modern architectures that are behavior based to ensure your applications run as expected, take on the zero trust philosophy at every layer. And it's not just about logging credentials, it's about the applications themselves that are running as expected. And I think that's important for people to be able to prove that to you. I think if we get there, we'll make it extremely difficult for the adversary to win, because we'll be able to detect small changes that will indicate something's amiss.
Those are all great points, and Lee really hit on the head. The concern for a lot of organizations as to the zero trust concepts, implementing some of those or all of them, right? Because it's not just one or two items; it's various. It's essentially concepts. Is of course going to be cost, right? The cost of implementation, the cost of investment for some of the products that'll help you get to that zero trust environment, or help you with a layered approach to your environment. That's one. Two is going to be the human resources. That's a whole other cost, right? Because if you're dealing with a customer, or you're an organization that's been around 20, 30 years on the internet, so you've been around since the beginning when the internet really popped off, and you still have been building upon the same network you've had those 30 years, what do you have? You have a largely flat network, right? Probably with a massive on-prem Active Directory environment, probably centralized. Maybe you have Azure, maybe you're not really using it. And then you have thousands upon thousands of users and thousands upon thousands more groups. It becomes very complex, Daphne. And so there is a massive cost to migrating into a layered environment, when Active Directory itself is the kind of the opposite of where you need to be, right? Um, so I think that the approach of even doing simple things, and this, I tell folks all the time, look, your organization may be in a tight place, so let's start having some conversations. When was the last time the CIO and the CISO had a real conversation? When was the last time we did a tabletop exercise and asked very hard questions? If we are breached today, what's the worst case scenario? If there's a ransomware attack that's successful, can we get back online? If we cannot get back online, do we have the capability to pay the ransomware group? Now, if the ransomware group is associated with a terrorist organization, is it illegal for us to pay that ransomware group? And if it is illegal for us to pay that ransomware group, then what do we do at that point, right? Do we start from scratch? Do we migrate to the cloud? But these are all conversations that we need to have. And unfortunately, since and mind you, I'm working on the offensive like 24/7 these days, a lot of clients that I'm dealing with, and I'm not admonishing them, are in that position, regardless of their security program maturity, regardless of their investments. They all seem to be pretty much in the same place, right? And we're talking about a small 1% on Lee. You probably, you could agree with this. Probably, a small percentage, 1 to 5% of these companies are where they need to be. And if there is a breach, they could get back online in 72 hours, right? If they need to do an investigation, they'll be able to do it. They have the logs, they have the resources, they have the team in place to do that. Everybody else is just catching up. Okay, it's difficult, but you know what? I think over time, we'll be able to get in a better place. I hope.
Mhm. I also think, part of the thing also is a lot of our legacy components in our network, we want to just forget about them. And I think that people have to realize sometimes that's their greatest vulnerability, and that we need to take every component seriously. If it's a legacy component, you still need to secure it. If you can't secure it, then somebody should sign up to that risk. I'm not going to be that person.
Mm. Lee brought up a good point there, accountability, right? Accountability is one of those words in our industry that's been like, it's like the boogeyman. It's in the closets, hiding, you know. But with these new changes in the SEC, and I alluded to them before, back in December, a couple months ago, the new regulations came in through the SEC that if you are a publicly traded company with stakeholders and investors, and if you're dealing with a breach, you have 4 days from your identification of the breach to notify the SEC of that breach, and of course your stakeholders. That has a lot of companies panicked, right? And I'll be honest with you, Lee, with all the breaches happening, I haven't really been seeing a lot of SEC 8K forms. The numbers are not aligning,
That's
right?
interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah. When you get bored, check out the SEC website. There's 8K forms there, but the numbers are not aligning, which more than likely means that you might see lawsuits happening very soon coming from the SEC. Um, And then, you have another thing that that's very important, Daphne, and that is that cyber insurance policies are being required in more and more states each year and in more and more industries. I'm not sure if you looked at the latest numbers, but those policies have blown up hundreds of percents, depending on the company, depending on the industry, right? So, in a way, companies are forced to deal with this problem. They're forced to have this conversation. They're forced to listen to me and Lee, nerded out on these topics, and you, Daphne. Um, but the next big step is how, right? How are we going to deal with this, and and how are we going to implement some accountability, right? Once you implement accountability, you're going to start to see some changes, Daphne.
Mm.
Promise
I
you.
also think to another point on that, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, Hector, is that
Sure.
the speed at which things are happening now
Mm.
are making it very difficult for even companies that are on top of the heap here to keep up with it. Just the speed at which things are changing and the ability to understand what's actually happening at every layer within the breach itself. I think it becomes important too. And I think that's something that people are going to have to consider, that if the current tools that we have can't keep up with the pace, we need to change them out. We need to come up with different approaches. And I mean, that's why we've been talking for a long time about being behavior-based approach and why we feel it's superior. It, I think it turns the table and allows you to focus on what your organization is trying to accomplish as opposed to trying to protect against everything that you don't know. And I think we need to flip that table to give ourselves a chance.
Well, I just want to thank you both, Hector and Lee, for your time. And to our listeners, thanks for sticking around. For more information about Rampart AI's application security solution for business continuity, head to rampart-ai.com. And just to touch on something Hector said about the SEC regulations, you can also head to rampart-ai.com. We have some blog posts about that already out. Until next time, stay secure.